guys, my first thing that I'd like to say, you guys don't need to cover me. This is freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is about truth coming to light, about people hearing your opinions. If you're afraid of that, I don't know why you're hosting public events, but that's fine. You talked about Benjamin Netanyahu referring to Palestinians, to Hamas terrorists as human animals. People in this school, from this group, have referred to my people as Zionist dogs. Dogs, as far as I'm concerned, are animals. So I think it's a little bit hypocritical for you to talk about a leader of another country while you are participating in that same form of dehumanization. To characterize the events of October 7th as a counteroffensive where my people were killed and maimed, and yes, raped, whether you like it or not, whether it fits your narrative. To characterize that as anything else but terrorism and a massacre is unacceptable from people who are studying to be social workers. If we want to have a conversation about the occupation, about the violence of the occupation, we can do that. If we want to talk about the military operation in Gaza, we can do that. I would love to have a genuine and real conversation with any of you. But I cannot do that when in these hallways you call for violence against me, against my children. I have 2 kids. When you write messages saying by any means necessary, is my life a means that is necessary? Are my children's life a mean that is necessary for liberation? I do not believe that what is happening in Gaza right now is a means for security for my people. I don't believe in that. I think that violence leads to more violence, leads to more violence. If anything has taught, growing up in Israel and Palestine has taught me, is that violence is the absolute wrong solution for anything. For anything. The idea that because nonviolent protests and activism hasn't led to the liberation of Palestinians, to deduce from that violence must be the answer when it has also not led to the liberation of Palestinians is ridiculous. My activism for Palestinians in Israel and Palestine has come from a place of love, of a place that I want Israel to be a better country. And I understand that you guys think that you have some right to decide whether Israel has a right to exist or not. I don't know why, but I understand that you do. I believe that there are 14 million people between the river and the sea, and none of them are going anywhere. And we need to find a solution that involves all of them. And that is not what you are doing here. It is not what you are doing here. And again, Layla, my heart goes out for your loss. It is inexcusable.
We hear you. Thank you.
You're listening to the Columbia HXA podcast. I'm Clayton Smith.
And I'm Anthony Rispo.
All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Columbia HXA podcast. I'm Clayton Smith, and as usual, I'm joined by Anthony Rispo. Say hi, Anthony.
Hey, everybody.
And today, Anthony and I are also joined by Ariana Pinsker-Lehrer. Ariana is a student at the Columbia School of Social Work. She is also an attorney in Israel. And as the fact that she's a student at the School of Social Work would suggest, she is training to hopefully become a social worker here in the U.S. Ariana has a very interesting backstory, is involved with a lot of interesting organizations, and we are going to get into all of that quite soon. But Ariana, why don't you just give us a basic backstory? Is there anything we missed, anything you want to highlight about where you come from and who you are?
Well, I'll start by saying that I was born in Israel. I grew up on Kibbutz Ktorah, which is in the south
of Israel, in the Arava Valley. And I have moved to the US about 2 years ago, for my husband's work. And up until then, we had been living in Tel Aviv for about 8 years. I am an attorney in Israel. I didn't practice law for a very long time. About, I
Well,
think it
you've
may be
practiced
like a
law a
year and
lot
a half.
longer than either Anthony or I have, so you're a lot more of an expert than we are.
I don't want to give the impression I have this mass, legal experience. I practice immigration and refugee law and a little bit of criminal defense. And yeah, and I'm, very excited to be here with you guys.
Yeah.
I transitioned to social work, partially because I didn't want to do the bar in New York. That sounded
Yeah.
awful.
Reasonable. Yeah.
That makes sense, yeah.
But also I'd been thinking about it for a while, and I just kind of jumped on the opportunity, and I wanted to continue working with the communities that I service, but in a way that felt a little bit more, I guess, inherent to me.
So that's not an unlikely coupling, law and social work, but what initially got you into law?
So I wanted to work in the field of human rights. It took me a while to get there. I'm very interested in a lot of different things. There was a long time in my life that I thought I was going to be a photojournalist. And there was time when even younger, I was going to be a fashion designer. So like I was all over the place, and I was living in Boston with my now husband, for about 5 years, and for 3 years I worked for an energy efficiency company, and I was like a Salesforce admin, and I did some interesting work with them, but I really kind of felt like it was more of a hobby, and it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And we went traveling for a year, and we sailed across part of the Pacific on a very
What?
small
What?
boat. Yes, yes.
You didn't mention to that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like when I think about it, I was like, I did what? Like, why did I do this? But I did. I got to French Polynesia, and that was just amazing. But I think that was
That's awesome.
time to just sit. It was really a privileged time, like to get to go travel for, a year. So I'm really grateful for that experience. And I understand why everyone doesn't do that. Like a lot of times, like I meet a lot of Europeans on gap years, like, oh, Americans don't travel. Like I'm like, not everyone can just travel for a year. Like
Yeah.
that is privilege, guys. But it helped me kind of focus on what I wanted to do. And I knew, and human rights was like very much a part of, I think, the language I learned at home. It was very much part of my dad's work and my mom's passions and interests, and just I knew I wanted to work in it, and I felt like the law was a tool that I could use to work in this field. And I would, and I, when during law school, I kind of focused on immigration and refugee laws. It was kind of around the time of the Syrian refugee crisis, and I had really, I had just become a mom, and I just remember seeing the photos, and seeing kids, and just I was like, okay, this is what I want to focus on. Like I'm gonna do this.
So an obvious observation on my part here, but it really seems like you are motivated to help people. And that it seems like your North Star. That seems like the thing that is common among most of what you've done in the past.
Yeah. I always examine that. I'm always like, oh, am I a white savior? Like, oh, like, is that me? It's so cliche. But I think that maybe there's part of that. But it's very difficult for me to sit with collective suffering of other people. It's like I've become a little bit jealous sometimes of people who don't care.
I know what you mean. I know. I
Like,
mean, I can't claim the things that I cannot claim to. I can't say that I do the things that you do, but I know what you mean. That sentiment rings very true. Sometimes I just think to myself, it would be nice just to
just to
not think as much about a
Yeah.
lot of things. But
Yeah, and really, you know, I always like check myself. Am I here for the right reason? Do I have, what do I even have to offer to this topic or to this community that I'm not a part of? But I guess I offer, you know, my humanity. And I think that, you know, as a social worker, one of my teachers, you know, she would talk a lot about how our goal is to be working to really end our collective suffering. And I think that that rang really true to me.
Yeah, you know, I think Ariana, I don't want to spend too much time talking about our opinions, but I will just say I think that if we lived in a world where everyone only cared about their communities, that would be a pretty horrible world. We need people like you to care about people that aren't from the same places or speak the same language or from the same background, right? We want more people like that. That's how we build bridges and make peace and help people and do all of those wonderful things. So you don't strike me as a white savior. And so
I also, if you're in this business to be a savior, a lot of times in the school social, they talk about like white guilt, and we're here to like relieve our guilt. And I'm just like, I don't feel guilty. I feel angry. That's different. And if you are here to feel less guilty, like you're in the wrong place. Like I only feel more, you know, more guilty or more angry the more I'm, you know, when I've realized that the only actions I can take are in some cases not that impactful. It's like I don't feel less guilty.
I just wonder, and we'll get to this later, but just as something to keep in the back burner for it to brew, is that something you hear often there about guilt, that you should go in with the sense of
It's discussed. It's discussed about, it's particular about white women social workers that I think sometimes our intentions or the reasons that we're there are generalized or oversimplified because of the history of the profession. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. I think you do need to ask yourself why you're there often, why you're still there, why are you know, but I do wish that there was a little bit of a less of just like this overall assumption.
Shouldn't that go for everybody though in the field?
Yeah, you know, I was just about to say the same thing. That should apply to white women and white men and black women and Asian men and everyone, right? Like everyone should interrogate their motivations for helping people.
Yes, everyone should interrogate their motivation. I think there is a little bit of an extra work for probably white social workers, particularly white women social workers. Actually white men as well, but there is a history. There is, you know, the origins of social work. You know, you know, started from that kind of moral church standpoint of like helping the poor, and you know, there were, you know, it doesn't have the best history.
I wonder.
So hold that thought, because I do want to get into that later, but I think I want to start sort of at the beginning where people might actually already be familiar with you as like not quite a public figure, but someone who has caught the public eye, at least very briefly, last year. And that was, well, we will have played the video, I think, before the start of the podcast, because I think it is a good hook. You got into, and actually, I will say very briefly, I think highlighting your past as someone who cares about people and cares about people not just from your own tribe is important. You were in this video confronting protesters about some of the rhetoric they were using and some of the things they were saying that you found disturbing and maybe not at home in a school of social work. So I don't want to put too many words in my mouth. Why don't you take us through that? This video that had gone sort of viral. What happened? How did it happen? Or how did it happen? Excuse me. And what was it like for you?
Yeah. So that event was actually a second. So the School of Social Work has a non kind of official group. I think they were calling themselves CSSW for Palestine or something like that on Instagram. It's not a caucus or anything official. It's just students that unofficially have decided to form this movement within the school, and they had held teach-ins where they studied certain materials from very, very specific points of views and agendas, and then they would kind of read essays that they had written about them. And so this was the second teach-in. We actually, most of us, so we can get into what group I guess I'm a part of, but that first teach-in, not really many members of kind of the Jewish community at the school social was not there. But this time we knew in advance, and it was the poster that kind of came out with this event was titled "The Importance of the Counteroffensive of October 7th" or something like that. And it was really shocking, I guess, and just painful that this was going to happen. And I mean, it was publicized, and I think the whole Jewish community of New York emailed Dean Bagg, demanding that this kind of get canceled. I personally emailed asking for the event not to be canceled. And I said, please don't cancel this event because that's viewed as censorship and silencing. Come and engage, come and take a stand as an administration, or even just as a personal, an individuals. And it's okay to say loud and clear that this is not social work, and that this is not what we're teaching you here. And if this is what you understand, from the materials, go back and read again. No one listened to me, of course, and the event, and that might not be the people's ideas. It could have been just my opinion. But the event ended up that school decided to lock the door of the room that they were supposed to be using. And then they basically just decided to hold it in the lobby. And the administration that the members of the school and staff and faculty that were there were kind of handing out umbrellas and making sure that those students aren't doxxed. It was very weird. I understand their concern for the safety of students, but I think that when students are choosing to protest publicly and hold an event in a public space, I'm not really sure they're deserving of that protection. And I'm not sure, not that anyone should be doxxed, but it's just not how free speech works.
Now, I'm wondering, in that moment, I am amazed at your composure. That it's a mix of things. You can tell you were there's so many emotions going on, it seems.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. How did you keep such composure and articulate the way you did so beautifully?
Well, very quickly, actually, before that, Anthony, I want to cut in and just ask, how did you end up in that? You were personally amongst them, so how did you get there? And then,
so I, practiced what I preached. I said I wanted the administration there to engage, so they didn't, and so I was going to be there. And it wasn't just me. There were a few other students from kind of the Jewish activist part of the school social work, and a few of us spoke out. Mine was the video that kind of people saw. It was so that's why I was there. The minute I realized it was happening, I knew that I was going to be there, and I knew that I was going to say something.
So you went there you wanted to engage with them. You wanted to kind of have a dialogue. That was the whole purpose of you being there.
My purpose of being, if it was going to happen, then I was going to be there. I would have been happy if the students decided not to have it at all.
Right.
But if they were going to have it, then yes, we were going to be a part of it, and we wanted our voice and our community heard, because up until that point, any kind of reaction that we had was like in emails to the administration. It wasn't really that public. We were trying to kind of respect school guidelines on like handing out materials and stuff like that. So, yeah.
And
But
so,
to answer Anthony's question,
yeah.
it was a very emotional moment. I don't think I don't love speaking in public. I definitely have that like heart racing thing.
It was incredible. My gosh.
Yeah, it was, you spoke well, but I'm sorry, continue.
Thank you. No, I'm glad that it resonated with people. I'm always a little bit like surprised that people are like interested, but I had written a lot of stuff before, like I'd written an email to the administration. So where there were definitely like concepts and ideas that I had that sat with me for a while. So I was able to say them in kind of an articulate way because I think I'd thought about them a lot before. So that helped. But yeah, it was very emotional. I like when I see it, I cringe. I'm like, oh, my voice.
We're all our own worst
Like,
critic.
why am I
Trust me,
so
you were great.
emotional?
Yeah.
It takes time to get used to our own voices, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But so you were in that moment and it just came out just like
I mean, it was so basic, I guess. It was like I just couldn't understand why no one else was saying it. No professor, no administrator. It seemed like common, something that should be said. And I felt very comfortable saying it. I wasn't second guessing myself. And I wanted to make sure that people in Israel saw that we were like fighting back a little bit. And I wanted to make sure that the Jewish community saw that we in America saw that we were fighting back a bit. And I got a ton of like responses afterwards from, through email and messages. And a lot of people in America, actually, like of the Jewish community, said like almost like they felt relieved.
They had a voice in you.
That someone said what they had been thinking, because it was it's complicated. Like a lot of us are very used to criticizing Israel and believe in the end of the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And like all of a sudden we're in this situation where we're on the defense and we feel like we can't really say everything we'd want to be saying or how it's going to be received or just a conflict. And so for them to hear someone finally kind of saying in a very clear way what they've been thinking, which is that there are red lines.
Yeah.
That's basically what I was trying to say. And, so I was happy that at least provided some relief for my community.
But in the room, what was it like in the room in that moment? What was the feeling in there? You said it, I mean, I'm paraphrasing what you said before. Did it fall on deaf ears or just really the room, the dynamic, and then the aftershocks of that? What was that like?
No one really said anything to me from that camp of students. There was kind of like a silence and they just went on to their next essay. I also kind of left after that. Like I know it continued on a little bit more. Maybe I stayed a little bit longer. At one point they asked to disperse and that's when I left and then it continued on some more. But I don't know, from a movement perspective, of course, it fell on deaf ears. Like they don't, from an individual perspective, maybe it made a difference for some. I know like some professors saw it and, it resonated with them. I wish they would be more vocal about that. It's hard. It's like I get it. There's a lot of pressure on them. There's a lot of contradicting ideas of how to support Palestine. And you know, but I've talked to professors sometimes, and then they tell me, you know, in private, they'll say, well, I believe in the two-state solution. Like, have you ever told the students that? Like, when you talk about,
Well, they're probably petrified of the students.
yeah, I'm sure there's fear. I'm sure there is fear, and vice versa. I'm sure that there's professors that would like to be even more active on the Palestine front and feel like they would be silenced, or, you know,
So that leads into something else I wanted to ask you about, which was what was it like after that, specifically in regard to the discourse around this issue? I mean, it seemed obvious. I mean, we were both at Columbia. We're undergraduates at GS, so we were in a different kind of part of the campus, different school. But obviously, tensions were really high. I know Anthony and I both felt it. I assume it was even more so at the School of Social Work. What was it like trying to engage? Did you try to engage with these issues after that moment and going forward and, into this semester? What was it? Was there a culture of censoriousness? What was that like? What has it been like?
so it really depends on your class, like who your professor is. Some professors made active decisions to not discuss this topic at all.
Mhm.
And some professors did discuss it. And students are also divided on their experiences of, was that good or not? Like, some students will say, it was really harmful to me that no professor discussed this in class. Like, I wanted to discuss it. I wanted to, to have dialogue about it. And there was not, and professors like shot it down. You have the other, scenario where students were harmed by discussions that happened in class. And I know of a lot of Jewish students that had harmful experiences in their classes, particularly in the prop classes, the power, race, oppression, privilege classes. So it really like depended on your professor. I was lucky. I had exceptional professors, and even in my prop class, I had an amazing professor that I just learned so much from, Professor Ife Leonard. And, even when conversations were very painful, they were respectful. And I learned from my classmates, and I hope I was able to, I hope they were able to learn from me as well. But as far as like the impact after, like from a large, I don't think that there was any real meaningful dialogue coming out of the School of Social Work or any other school at Columbia. And it was very disappointing. It was disappointing, particularly in the beginning. I think in Israel, I belong to small parts of society that do look to come together, such as like movements like Standing Together. There's a lot of them, but so I was looking to, yes, initially grieve within my community, but then come together with people who do want to grieve collectively. And there was none of that. And I actually went to one of the president's listening sessions, President Shafiq, and I brought this up, and she said that at one point, and this is just, kind of what I heard, that after October 7th happened, there was I think they discussed maybe having some kind of get together with the school's imam and I think the rabbi from the Hillel or whatnot. And basically the response from both was like, it's not the time. And I was just, and I'm sure they had their reasons, but I was just so disappointed to hear that, because if there had been two students that wanted to come together, just two, then we couldn't get our faith leaders to like facilitate that, to hold space for that.
You really think they dropped the ball on leadership, it sounds like.
Really, yeah, because there was a window for that.
Right.
There's a window for that type of work. And if you don't fill that window, then we get to these really kind of extreme sides. And people follow that. And I know that a lot of people wanted to support or to support Palestinians. And this was the only real movement that was kind of like offered very easily. And that, you know, maybe that's my fault as well, right? Like I didn't start, I don't know, two-state solution camp.
I want to capture that.
Pretty busy to me.
I want to capture that really. Yeah.
You got a lot going on. It shouldn't be up to just you.
Yeah, but you mentioned but since we're talking to you, you mentioned maybe that was, you just said a few seconds ago, the easiest movement that they had. What was it that you said about that? Just a few seconds ago about the Palestinian.
Like if you are a student who's not Palestinian or not Israeli, and you just want to you want to support the end, you want a ceasefire. Okay, say you just want a ceasefire. You know, there's no moderate kind of movement on campus to do that. It's either you're within the full-on encampment movement or you're like not. And
okay, no, go on, sorry, because
that's what I meant by it.
Yeah. So
and I do take personal responsibility a little bit for that. This is a student-run movement. This isn't like the administration created it. And I think that last year I spent way too much time having conversations with the administration, asking them to start something, to like bring speakers, that to bring, you know, asking them to do that work for me. And maybe that wasn't a fair expectation. I saw it as the role of a university to bring different perspectives, to bring perspectives that are what I view as you know, different and interesting. And like there's a lot of organizations in Israel that work, you know, with Israelis and Palestinians. I mentioned Standing Together, the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies. You know, there's a lot of them. And I thought it would be nice if the school started to do this type of work. This year, I think I've made an active decision that that the administration is not going to do that. They've had the chance. It's just not going to happen. I know they've brought in the Consensus Building Institute, I think, to do some work with faculty and maybe some student trainings. I've heard like mixed reviews of that.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, Ariana, in our experience, I mean, we started you know, the chapter of Heterodox Academy here because we wanted to build or affect the culture of campus to be more friendly to dialogues and difficult discussions, right? And we definitely went with the idea that if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I would not trust college admin, if I'm being frank, to do
that,
everything we want them to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. And I really, so this year I kind of, and I think part of the reason that I wasn't doing this last year was because the ideas that were being taught in the School of Social Work made me feel like if I talked about peace and dialogue and a two-state solution or whatever solution, I was being a reformist, which is a white supremacist and a colonialist. And
okay.
So Ariana, I have a question for you. I really want to take a few things together and tie them up with you both and see what you think. What I'm hearing is that, so these ideas are falling on deaf ears. These are just general things I've been hearing, and that nobody really wants to budge. And there's an aversion and that to ideas. And that also the most expedient cause to get on would be I would say decolonization, but the encampments. So tying that all together, would I sense in American universities, in the American experience on college campuses, there is already this feeling that indelible to the white person, in their personhood, indelible to their character, is a colonizer. And so what I'm reading here in the social work page is the advocacy and social work practice. This is the socialwork.columbia.edu. This course builds on the knowledge, values, and skills provided in decolonizing social work. So my question to you is, how do you effectively get students to hear these nuanced ideas if they almost religiously believe that indelible to their character, to their personhood, is a colonizer? And and I'll tag on to it, and that people from Israel, that Jews are colonizers. Like, how do you actually untangle that and have a decent conversation with somebody who really almost religiously believes that? If that's not an overwhelming question, which it is, but anything you can take from that, help me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's not about untangling someone else's perceptions or ideas, or it's about presenting your own.
Mm.
And someone can take that and they can do whatever they want with that. And they can learn from it. They can, push it away. So I'm never gonna, like, my goal isn't necessarily for you to change your mind. Like,
Sure.
that's not what I mean. Yes, overall, of course, I would love if everyone, believed what I believe, especially in
I don't know.
Israel.
That would be a boring world, right? If we all believe the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I try not to act from that place. I try to act from a place of, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is how I act. This is why. This is where I came from. This is my lived experience and what it has taught me.
Mm-hmm.
And if we still disagree afterwards, then we still disagree. But we need to learn to exist and work and, function in a world where we don't agree always, but in a way that's not harmful and violent.
Well, it sounds like,
And
I'm sorry. I was going to say, it sounds like the issue is the same kind of issue we've been tap dancing around, which is just expression and censorship, and the ability of students to engage in respectful disagreement. I mean, the Israel-Palestine issue, even for non-Israelis and non-Muslims / non-Arabs, non-Palestinians, right? People feel very strongly about it. Extremely. It's a very emotional issue. And being able to talk across ideological divides with these very contentious issues without resorting to name calling, which is why I think Anthony and I were gushing so much about your little speech to these protesters, was because you were emotional, but you were still respectful. You really made an effort. I mean, the first thing you said, I think, in the video is reaching out to a young woman who appeared to have lost family, from what I could tell, and humanizing them, saying, I'm so sorry for your loss. I would love to hear more about their humanity. It seems like you have that ability, and I'm sure others do too, but maybe not enough. So did you not feel like you could have these dialogues with, it sounds like you didn't, with professors, with students? How do you think we change that?
I think I really, like, I was afraid to say in class, not only was I afraid to say, I was afraid to say in class, I believe in a two-state solution. I was afraid to say who else wants to join me. Like, I was afraid of that, because I felt like to fully meet the ideas that I was being taught, I would have to give up my country, my part of my identity. I would have to,
right,
become an anti-science, like, that's
right.
And I maybe that is true, but I can't live like that. Like, I can't
And
live like that. And I think I did at one point have kind of a conversation with two different people. One was my professor, and I said, like, maybe I'm not doing enough. Maybe I'm not as far along in the journey that, you know, we've been discussing of becoming an anti-racist and all that.
But that's the stuff I'm wondering, Ariana,
Yeah.
because it all sounds really good to have a goal to end collective suffering and to be for the oppressed. But if under that guise is this mandate that an ought, like you ought to end, or the is ought, like you know, you are white, so therefore you indelible, like I was saying before, to your character, to your personhood, is a colonizer, so you ought to fight that thing that's within you. And it's always this like kind of original sin that you can't get rid of. So I understand from a personal level that you can only do so much, and you're an exemplar to that. I mean, that's why we're talking to you. I mean, to watch you speak so fluently and beautifully in that language of justice, of true social justice, is remarkable. But you don't hear that coming from a lot of people who are on the social justice side of
Yeah.
things, because it has become it's you know, it has become sort of its own religion if you think about it. These mandates that I talk about, you
Well,
know,
look,
you must, you know.
I think that you know, what you're talking about, like accepting this part of you that is a colonizer. Um,
Yeah.
I think, first of all, I'm a student of this, right? Like I
Yes.
am still not an expert at any of this. And I actually would so recommend that you bring on someone like, I don't know if you interview faculty as well, but like
We do.
uh, Professor Courtney Cogburn, she created the prop curriculum. Like there are amazing people that worked really hard to create the prop curriculum, and the people who teach it, like it's hard work. um a lot of them are black women. Like it's not easy to sit with, you know, a group of students, a lot of them white, and like talk about these issues. So, and actually it was very disappointing, like the New York Times had an article about what was happening at the School of Social Work. It was written by Pamela Paul, and
Mhm.
she interviewed me. She ended up using you know, something small that we talked about, but you know, that was real criticism of the School of Social Work and what was going on there. And
Yeah.
afterwards, the creators of the prop curriculum, a bunch of the prop professors wrote a response. Like they worked hard. They wrote like a response by the guidelines to the New York Times, and the New York Times never published it. They just didn't even let them respond. And it's like, well, this is what we're talking about. You know, we have a white woman coming from outside to like criticize this thing, and you're not even letting the people who created it you know, have a voice.
But it's
So
interesting because you can say the other way around, like DEI programs, you know, it's become a almost a fixed. Well, now a lot of them are being challenged, but
yeah,
to challenge them as a white student would you'd automatically be considered nefarious. And so it kind of goes both. You kind of see causality. We see causality in the ways that we do through the lens of our experience. I understand that. And I do wish that they would have published their counter. But I mean, it's this idea that we see we see things, we see oppression everywhere and in everyone based on their identity, that I wonder what can you
yeah,
tell me what you think about that, coming from Israel and being surrounded by states that don't want to see you there? Do you feel
yeah,
like a colonizer? You know, like what do you feel about that in
Yeah.
terms of
Where
yourself?
did actually, let me just put a point on that. Where do you think in this framework that is of oppression and privilege that is set up in the School of Social Work and other schools, do you think the Jews and specifically the Israelis tend to fit in the minds of the students who learn this curriculum? And to what degree do you think that is accurate, or it is misleading students, or maybe hurting nuance, or like what do you think that that way of thinking and that view of the world might have affected the way that discourse didn't happen or was difficult in the School of Social Work? Because people perceived you in a certain way and being in a certain position in this hierarchy.
yeah. I mean, I feel like that's a lot of questions.
I'm sorry.
So
Yeah,
let me
no, no,
yeah.
it was a lot.
Are
I
you a
was trying to
colonist?
distill it down.
Yes.
So let's start actually with the beginning, which is let's start at the base, which is there is this thing that is taught at the school, this sort of privilege hierarchy that people often criticize for maybe being not very nuanced and a little flat. And it generally stipulates that people who are, let's say, male, cisgendered, white, certainly wealthy, are towards the higher
Married
end of the
with
privilege.
a dog,
Right. With
homeowners. There's a
yeah,
lot.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
a lot. It
It's
goes
a lot.
on.
And then
Yeah.
you have people on the bottom who are like people, as they would say, people
Yeah.
of color, women, gender nonconforming people, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like often it is talked about that the Jewish community is in a weird spot on there, because there's one sense in which I think something you sent me, they referred to Ashkenazi normativity or something.
Yeah.
That
Ashkenormativity.
Holy
right,
bells and
but then there's
whistles.
also like the Ashkenazi Jews are basically white, quote unquote, or whatever. And then there's this idea that, but on the other hand, anti-Semitic instances are rampant in our society and certainly in other societies. So again, this is a lot. I'm trying to get at something something pointed here, which is, do you do you think that this way of thinking, this way of viewing the world affects our discussion of Israel Palestine? And is it hurting or is it helping? Right. So where do
So
Israelis
first
fit
of all,
on this
yes,
spectrum?
yes,
Yeah.
it is affecting the Israel-Palestine conflict. I will say about the prop curriculum and this way, what I was taught, okay, because I was taught by one person.
Mhm.
And obviously I read the readings and I found it to be not flat
Okay.
and
Okay.
very nuanced and like much more complex than I now understand it has been perceived by some of my fellow classmates.
Mhm.
It was kind of clear to me from and maybe I learned it wrong, I don't know, that we are all within this system, sometimes oppressed, sometimes the oppressor, like we can be both. That, I use the prop, I use it with my, with clients or participants. It's helpful. It's a lens. It's a helpful lens, just like the feminist lens is a helpful lens, just like other critical thinking movements, are helpful. I don't use it all the time and all my thinking, and there's some clients that it's less relevant to them. But what I learned from learning in this way or using this lens was also like, how have these different systems, whether they stem from white supremacy or capitalism, which according to everything kind of stems from white supremacy, are harmful to me, and I'm white, so, and you know what, they might be harmful to that, rich white guy with a home and a dog and who's married and has kids, like
Mhm.
there's pressures that this system creates on that individual. So I found it nuanced and helpful. I do understand how we got here. I do
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
how it was perceived by some. And I wish the school has social work there had been messaging about that, but it didn't happen. And to me, to understand how we got here, look, when the orientation of the school of social work, okay, 2 days are like Columbia stuff, and then there's the other 2 days are called PDSA, which I'm blanking out. It's like professional development
Something or other.
awareness. So yeah, I forget what it is, but it's like this program that was created by students and alumni for incoming students, and it's kind of to make sure that we're all on the same page of what language we're going to be using. There's a lot about what microaggressions are. For some reason, one video on that is not enough.
Very interesting
And
research
Yeah, I
program.
looked
yeah,
at some of the
and
material you sent me, by the way, and I found it. I
yeah,
wish I had a better word to use, but kind of cringe. Some
I
of
have
it
to,
was.
yeah, I have to tell you, as a microaggression, just a parenthetical, the science on microaggressions is just not strong. And I hate to sound like that whiny brat in the corner who's just like pouncing around and saying, no microaggressions, but it's just, they're unfalsifiable. And the fact that it's like, okay, so for instance, in borderline personality disorder, there's this phenomenon called psychic equivalence, which um, is a persistent cognitive distortion for people with the disorder. It's another name for it is inside out thinking. So it's essentially, it goes like this. The way I feel reflects reality, meaning my feelings are absolute reflections of reality, regardless of how you feel and think. So, notwithstanding personal experience, of course, and like we want to be present for each other's personal experiences and have empathy and listen. This kind of thing distorts that kind of wholesome interaction by ipso facto making one's feeling reality. And microaggressions contain that phenomenon because it's very easy for someone to say, you looked at me that way, that means. And so then when that person takes the opportunity to correct course and to defend their character, that's evidence of them being hostile. So the thing that baffles me is that so much of this has already been shown in the psychological literature, yet schools are using these programs, research programs, to prop up ideology that it's to me that's a huge problem. I don't know what you feel. What do you think about
well, I
my
mean,
rant there about that?
no, yeah, it's okay. I guess I have complicated feelings about what you just said because, first of all, like the anti-Semitism task force came out with that report about their work and the 500 listening sessions that they'd done where Jewish students, talked about their feelings and incidents that had happened to them. And that was kind of, there were a group of professors that tried to say that that's invalid, that that's people's feelings and that's not real research. So, I do look, I'll give you a perfect example. Okay. I went into class the other day and there was a student that had a sticker that said on their binder something, globalize the Intifada.
Ugh.
And they sat next to me and I my heart started beating, like it felt like I wanted to get out of the room. I felt like I wanted to cry. Like I had this like very
Sure.
strong emotional response. And it was really, really difficult for me to continue to learn to like sit there and learn and concentrate on what the teacher was saying. That word to me is a violent word. It does not matter that people come and tell me, it just means uprising. I have lived experience from living in Israel during the second Intifada and the first
Signals
one.
it, right? Yeah.
And you can't erase that. That's my trauma. But am I in real danger during class? No, right? Like the reality is I'm not, but I feel my body's like responding as if it's in some kind of danger. And I think there needs to be a balance between, understanding how feelings impact us and our ability to function and our ability to be in a learning environment, with the reality of whether someone is unsafe or not. So that's, I guess, kind of one thing. I'm trying to remember the continuation.
No, that was a great.
We admittedly we did get a little muddled. I think the fact of the matter is, I think this podcast, we have it like an hour and a half, and we're dealing with really big topics, right? So what's interesting about you, Ariana, is you interface with a lot of, like, personally, excuse me, with a lot of the things, different things that we find interesting. So, all the discussion around DEI we find very interesting. And I'll be upfront. Anthony and I are extremely skeptical of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, not on the principle of like diversity and inclusion, because we very much agree with that. But I think, equity, people do some weird things with that I think could be very counterproductive. But there's the whole Israel-Palestine issue, which is
Right.
extremely interesting. And you are obviously have a first, and then there's the whole, School of Social Work interfacing with those two things specifically.
Yeah. And I will say about, so we talked
Yeah.
about what was happening at the orientation.
Right.
But one of the most important things that happened in the orientation was actually one of the materials that we got, which was an essay by Eve Tak and Kei Wang Yang. I think it's
I have that up.
That decolonization is not a metaphor.
Yeah.
This was a 40-page essay. Very interesting, by the way.
We'll include it in the show notes, by the way.
Reminding all of us students that when Indigenous communities say decolonization, they're not talking about decolonizing the education system or decolonizing social. They're talking about their land. They want their land back. And all of us, unless we are Indigenous, are colonized, are settlers, even African Americans, other migrants that have made their way to the US.
Again, that indelibility.
And not only are we not, and we're not really supposed to, my impression from what was written was that we weren't really supposed to discuss what decolonization meant for us, because decolonization was concerned about the colonized and not the colonizer. And I read this and I was like, okay, like maybe I'm not really working towards, I guess, that type of decolonization. And maybe I'll just be quiet in class. Like, I didn't know what to think. I was like, whoa, like.
Well, this gets at, I think, what we were trying to get at earlier, which is, Israelis are painted as colonizers. And you have this ideology that is bought by at least a large portion of the people at the School of Social Work, faculty and students, that sees this decolonization is not a metaphor. And they're like, yeah, that's it. We agree with that.
Yeah.
So how do you have a productive discussion about a two-state solution?
Right.
Or I think briefly in our pre-call a couple months ago, we talked on Zoom, and you mentioned like a one-state kind of federal solution, or like even more creative ways to allow Palestinians and Israelis to share the land. Right. How do you talk about that when people are like, no, we mean the Israelis are colonizers. Anyone who's a colonizer is doing something immoral, full stop. And we do not want to share the land. We want to take the land back. That it's really hard to they don't want to discuss. So I think that's what we're getting at is
yeah,
how do we get
hard.
It's
not an easy conversation to have. And because we read this essay and then there was no discussion about it. Like my group, like it was brought up for a second. I kind of said, well, they said we're not supposed to discuss it. So I don't really know what we're supposed to, there was no like professional, like this type of essay needs real facilitation. Like I'm not talking about an alumni or a student that just graduated. Like you need a very skilled professor, that has a lot of experience having these types of conversation to help process that essay and what people feel about it. And if people don't agree with it, they should be able to say that. Or if people have questions about it, they should be able to ask. And there was none of that. So you had this, and then you have the whole title of the social work degree is decolonizing social work. Like any class we take, there's a section of it that we go back to the prop curriculum. And where we talk about how whatever topic we're talking relates to prop. So when October 7th happened, of course, like this, it makes perfect sense to me how we got to where we got and why Israel and Palestine are viewed in this very binary way. I will say about prop, why I do think it is important And that is because the communities that generally social workers serve
Mhm.
are suffering from different types of oppression. And a lot of social work is just very micro and is focused on, therapy and counseling and like helping like one individual at a time. But if we do want to help our clients on a much, much lighter level, or help society, help the communities that we serve, then we have to address larger inequalities that a lot of times cause a lot of different other issues. So I don't want this to like seem like I'm just, shitting on prop. Like I
Sure. Yeah. No.
very
Yeah,
much.
you seem to like it overall, just have some small tweaks you'd want to make.
But I wonder.
Was
about
that correct? I don't want to. Is that accurate, by the way?
Yeah,
You
I
think?
think there needs to be corrections on how it's taught, how it's like interpreted. Maybe, but I don't know how much control a professor has over that. But like, there should have been. I'll give you an example. Like sometimes Franz Fanon is brought up.
I was going to mention him. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
Yeah, in difficult
psychiatrist, right?
classes.
Yeah.
And
Real peace loving guy.
yeah, yeah. So he wrote "Wretched of the Earth,"
Right.
and that was really work of it, just the psychological damage of colonization to colonized communities. And they talked about the right to resist using armed resistance, using violence, and that's a simplification of the work, but a lot of students like bring him up as like this Che Guevara, like really like
As a
great,
god of,
a great
Yeah.
illusion. Another figure people champion who was, well, I don't know that much about Fanon. I should be careful, but Che Guevara was
Yeah, and
a
I mean,
rough
like in
dude.
that idolization type of way.
Right, right. He was not a great guy.
phenomenal. So he wrote black skin, white masks also, right? I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have, which I haven't not read.
Yeah.
But no, I've never heard a professor bring up like some of the criticisms of Fanon. Hannah Arendt, right? She has criticism of him and of how violence leads to more violence, and like that, it's and so. But I'm sure that there's professors that know of criticism of him. And I feel like at an academic institution, that should be brought up.
Yeah.
It shouldn't, we're supposed to be learning theories, and sometimes it just becomes, because of the nature of social work and the issues that we're always working on, it does a little bit become doctrine. And even like I think the National Association of Social Workers, like they changed one of their laws, or like social justice is like social workers are supposed to be working towards social justice. So it's the nature of the profession. It's, probably 30, 40 years of academia going in this direction. And now it's the whole, like the title of the degree at Columbia School of Social Work is really decolonizing social work. And so it's just very clear to me why Israel and Palestine are viewed the way they are. And to get to your like question from 20 minutes ago, is it helpful? No.
That's the
Israel,
big question.
Palestine is like, there are elements of colonialism in what happened in 1948. Is that the whole story? No, absolutely not. Can you take cookie cutter social justice solutions from the other side of the world and implant them to the Middle East? No.
Right.
Yeah, well, you might disagree, Ariana, but I don't even think those can work here. So that's
I would agree with you, Clay. I mean,
yeah.
So in determining how we deal with the issues, we're talking about social work working on the macro level. The diagnosis sometimes seems to be lopsided. That's my problem with it. If you've ever heard of Glenn Lowry, he's a Brown University professor of economics, and he talks about this a lot. He's got to be in his late 70s. and I'm doing a disservice by not remembering his book that he just published. But
It's
anyway,
a
the
memoir.
short,
Yeah.
a
I think
memoir,
it's
right?
something Memoirs of a Black Conservative. It might be something
That
something like that.
and so to Clay's point, he's a Black conservative, and he's gone, been in and out of a political identification from liberal, moderate, conservative, and he's conservative now. Anyway, the short of it is that he points to the issues within the Black community as the macro issues, things that can be addressed within the community, notwithstanding the broader issues at hand, and to some degree how issues become very culturally specific or context dependent on the group itself. So you have gun violence, for instance, in the Black community, and you don't see that in any other community except this community, and they have to tackle that. But they as a community have to actually face that and tackle that, is his argument. So I'm wondering on your end, at what point does a sort of macro issue like that become more micro in terms of the community addressing it rather than
It has
outsourcing?
to be all. It has to
Okay.
be all. I
But
mean,
what's,
I'm
yeah.
in the integrated it's called IPP, Integrated Program and Practice,
Mhm.
and a pathway in the
Mhm.
school of social work there. And that really is addressing issues from a micro, meso, macro.
Okay.
Mezzo's one
lens.
not one you hear a lot. I like that.
Yeah. So you really can't, like, I believe that any issue, that when we're any social justice issue, I guess, very much needs to be tackled on all fronts. Part of that is learning about, the greater powers that affect, the specific system. And part of it is about looking within, taking personal responsibility, taking responsibility as a community. Just because, if you think about alcoholism, okay, or substance abuse disorders, the whole biopsychosocial model of treating substance abuse, right? We're going to look at the individual, what biological factors might be there. We're going to look at the social factors that might be there. We're going to look at the environmental factors that might be there. There's no, missing part of that. Like so I don't think that Prop is coming and saying that this community's problem is, because white supremacy is involved here, because there's some kind of a larger system of oppression, that the only solution is like to solve this like one macro, like I think it's saying that we also need to be paying very much attention to this.
All right, that clears up some things
Yeah.
in my mind about the program. That's why I was wondering. Yeah.
Just very, very quickly, the book we were
Yeah.
talking about, I looked it up just so we get it right. Late Admissions: Confessions of a Black Conservative. That is Glenn Lowry's
I will
recent
have to
memoir,
add
which I
it
hear
to
is
my-
quite good. Yeah.
to
Yeah,
my
I have
reading
to.
list.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reminded of, I guess, as we like talk about, decolonization and like to me, like when we're talking about Israel and Palestine and why I think it's not helpful, I think it takes people out of the room. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, I feel like there's some idea that in Israel right now, everyone is just like dying for the two-state solution, and, and Palestinians must say no, this, like, no one in Israel is talking about that. And so my advocacy usually is about trying to get Israelis, right, to be talking about peace, to be talking about ending endless military occupation. But now I can't do that because, like, I need to talk about why Israel is not a colonization. And at the end of the day, like, the whole idea of, who is indigenous, I mean, this is being recorded, so I'm sure someone will respond to that. But like, I don't care. Like, if you believe that Palestinians are indigenous to, Palestine, and God comes down to you and is like, Clayton, Anthony, I'm sorry. They're not. They've only been there a few hundred years, and the Jews are the indigenous people. Do you now wake up and are like, okay, well, then they all have to leave? Like, no,
Yeah.
they
I mean, yes, I agree with you. Not yes, I'm
have
disagree.
a right to live there because they live there. They are there.
Yes.
And vice versa. Like, if God came down to me and was like, Jews, not indigenous to here, sorry, I wouldn't wake up and call all my friends and be like, we got to go back to wherever we came from. Like, no, like I said it in my video, there's approximately 14 million people between the river and the sea, and no one is going anywhere. And we are sharing this land. There's no not sharing this land. We can do it in war, or we can do it in peace.
And I think that is, I have to say I agree with that 100%. And the thing that disturbs me about the protesters so much, and then I do really want to get to the organization. I think actually this is a good transition into it, because you've worked with in the refugee law in Israel, and you've mentioned something, an organization that you donate to that is trying to help the Gazans. Yeah.
Jumpstarting. Yeah.
So I want to get to that, but I just want to say one thing very quickly, which is the thing that bothers me so much about the protests we've seen in the U.S. on college campuses and at Columbia especially, is it seems like they want to goad the Palestinian people and Hamas into a fight that they will not win. And the thing I always say to people is it is like if I'm out
it's enabling.
It's enabling violence, and it's in a weird way kind of justifying, and I don't like this, it's kind of justifying the hard right in Israel, where they're saying we can't live with the Palestinians, they're always going to try and kill us. Well, if that's true, we're in a very weird and uncomfortable place where very awful decisions have to be made. And I really don't want to be there. And the thing I always tell people is like, it's like I went to a bar with Anthony and goaded him into a fight with a guy 2 times his size who's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And when he lost, saying, hey, he kicked your ass, you got to go get revenge. And I kept pushing him into a fight. And it's like, how much do I really care about my friend if I want to go push him into a situation where he's going to get hurt? And it seems like these kids are so ideologically driven by this idea of, like we've been talking about, decolonization, that they don't realize that there's a better way where people can actually share in abundance. And you don't have to try to cheer on a terror organization to start a war that they will lose and will be bad for the Palestinians way more than anyone else.
Yeah.
So
I think there's a big confusion between, actually, I think it was like the president of the New Israel Fund, like, had a quote that I saw that was like, people confuse supporting Israel with supporting the Israeli government. And I think a lot of the protesters confuse supporting Palestinians with supporting their Hamas government. And I think there is this over, like, kind of bumper sticker attitude of like, we stand in full solidarity with someone, even when they do very, very violent things, we're not gonna call them out. And which to me is just, I don't know, it's just not something I can abide by. Again,
well,
but I will say that it's very, very privileged. It's very privileged to be on the other side of the ocean and support the most extreme. I mean, they follow Thalabit and, the principles laid out by the PLO. There's, I think, 5 main ones, the right to resist, Jerusalem, the right to return, and like nationhood. But part of that is non-dialogue, non-normalization. And to just be promoting this and supporting this from the other side of the ocean, like, when you will never be the one to pay the price for that. It's really, really privileged and unhelpful. And Colombia should have been a place where Palestinians and Israelis can come together and grieve together and recognize each other's trauma and each other's humanity and take responsibility for our community and what it has done in this conflict, and Colombia was not a place for that. And I'm sure that I will be labeled like a colonizer.
No, because you're Ariana, you're a place for that, and you exemplify that through your efforts, as Clay was getting to about your projects.
Yes, I will
Yeah,
discuss.
yeah. Let's
And
take it
so-
away with that.
So
Okay.
that's a beautiful way to
Yeah. So in Israel, I was an attorney and I did some pro bono work for the Hotline during Refugees and Migrants in Israel. They mostly work with Sudanese and Eritrean asylum seekers. There's also a small Congolese, a very, very small Congolese community. There's Ethiopian asylum seekers, and there are also some Ukrainian that got to Israel after the war broke out. But most of their work is with Sudanese and Eritrean refugees. And so Israel really doesn't have, it provides people with basically temporary protected status, that it's something that it doesn't provide them with any type of social welfare benefits. And there's no real path to being recognized as a refugee. Like basically people will file asylum claims and they'll never be checked. I think there's around, it's approximately 30,000 asylum seekers from Sudan and Eritrea. 6,000 of them are from Sudan. About 3,000 of them have kind of a temporary residence status, which was kind of pushed on by court decisions because their asylum claims weren't being decided upon. But there's 3,000 that still kind of have just these like temporary visas that basically they need them. They're not like work visas, but they need them in order to just be able to get work in Israel. So they also help victims of human trafficking. And sometimes they'll be the ones to really like discover the human trafficking routes. Recently, they discovered kind of a route of women coming from Africa to like, I think Saudi Arabia or Jordan. They get kind of put as like house staff, but really get treated basically as slaves. Sometimes they'll escape to or be trafficked to the West Bank, and somehow they make their way to Israel. And the Hotline was kind of the first to kind of discover this new type of route. So I've been very involved with them. Israel's immigration system is pretty bad unless you're Jewish, basically. I always tell people like during my legal studies, like I worked for a summer at the Harvard Immigration and Refugee Clinic, and it's a legal clinic. And it was like right when Trump kind of came into power, and he canceled prosecutorial discretion on deportation, and all these cases that they were used to kind of flowing through basically stopped. And it was like, and in my head I was like, you see this document that someone can fill out and someone will check it and someone will put a stamp on it or not, like that's amazing. Like, you have a system. It's not just gonna sit forever, so
one small win for American bureaucracy.
yeah, like but so that's kind of one thing that I'm still very much involved in, as much as I can be while in school. And then so the Jumpstart Hope for Gaza is actually a project that is run by Damor for Community Development, which is a Palestinian organization. And it's supported by the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies. And so I'll give you some background to that. So the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies is an academic institute in the Arava Desert on my kibbutz. I will shout out to my dad. He was David Lehrer was the executive director for many years, and that's why it holds a very special place in my heart. A few years ago, Professor Tariq Abu Hamad replaced him. And he was already involved at the institutes for years, and he's truly an amazing human being as well. And they bring Palestinians, Israeli, like Israeli Palestinians as well, Jordanians, and some students from around the world to study the environment together, with the idea that the environment knows no borders. If you want to solve water problems in Jordan, you have to work with Israel. If you want to solve waste management issues in the West Bank, Palestinians and Israelis have to work together. So they have a undergrad program and they have a master's program as well. And after October, and for a long time, they've had joint projects with Damor for community development. They've worked for them. They've been a close partner with them for a while. And after October 7th happened, I know it was horrible for everyone involved, obviously. But my father, he was in touch with his colleague in Gaza, who I don't know if she'd want to be named here, so I'm not going to name her.
Totally fine.
Yeah, and an amazing woman, who I very much admire. Anyway, they after a while and just seeing what was going on, they kind of understood that to rebuild Gaza at one point will take billions, right? And years, 20 years, I don't know how long. But the Institute has a lot of kind of very small scale but effective sustainable technologies for dealing with what we call like WASH, so water, sewage, there's another one.
Maybe or something like that, like the basic needs to sustain.
Yeah. And so those could be implemented relatively quickly to help small refugee camps, sometimes some of a few hundred and some of up to like a few thousand. And they were going to do this. And so they partnered with Damor. And there's one real like pilot refugee camp set up that I think services around 750 people, I want to say. And that's called the Zomi refugee camp. And it's, they work with the army to allow, supplies in. It's very difficult right now. It's difficult the security around getting supplies in. But I think the idea is that this could be something that would start small scale and then could be implemented in other communities. But there's a huge, huge sewage problem. The water system infrastructure in Gaza has completely been destroyed. Electricity, of course not. So, after October 7th and after my initial trauma and just really feeling a complete lack of hope, and talking to my father and understanding that this is something they're pursuing, then my husband and I decided that, this was what we needed to do. Like, we needed to have some kind of, to see an Israeli organization working with a Palestinian organization together and not losing touch, because a lot of cross-border organizations stopped, dialogue for a while, and the Arava Institute never did, and Damor never did, and they kept working together. So it was kind of like, this is what we want to support.
Yeah. Well, both of those sound remarkably good. I mean, we talk about a lot of, I think, dark topics sometimes on this podcast, especially this episode where, we're talking about the horrible thing. We didn't touch on it too much, but the horrible things that are going on in Gaza, obviously October 7th. So to hear that there are these organizations, the first one obviously isn't directly related to those things, but it is doing some good. You're fighting trafficking, which is, I would say, pretty important. And then to hear that there are still, the fact that there's even that one organization that is still talking across that divide with everything going on is at least one small ray of hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
think it's
again,
extremely
like,
important.
I don't, I think the war needs to end. Like, I don't think it needs to end. The destruction. I think Kamala Harris put it really well, that Israel has a right to defend itself, but how it does it matters.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a lot of failure on that part, and just a complete lack of care for human life. I think it's a given to me that on Hamas side they don't care about human life, but like I am very, I guess, disappointed in just, and I mean, and that's hard to say because I know soldiers and I've served in the IDF, and I know a lot of people do care, but and are making efforts and to protect human life, but from a large scale, from a systemic decision-making process, like that is not the situation. You can't look at Gaza and say that that's the situation.
Yes. I think regardless of what you think of the war, how it's being carried out, how it's being justified, what's happening in Gaza is just unconscionable. I mean, the death toll is staggering. The amount of munitions being used in such a small area is horrifying.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's tough. And I think this gets back to the heart of what we were talking about, which is if we can't have dialogue, if the two sides, if we can't even do it here at Columbia, which we should be on easy mode here in theory,
Right.
Yeah.
right? If we can't get the people who are walking through the rubble of Gaza or are hiding in their basements in Tel Aviv from rocket attacks, if we have to figure out a way to get them to talk, because the only other avenue from discussion is what we're seeing right now. I don't think anyone wants that. At least not anyone with any humanity.
Yeah.
Well, you just
Oh.
hit it on the head, Clay. I mean, the humanity, it's when you're dealing with groups that, at the heart of it, the substrate, when you're dealing with extremist groups that want to see you gone, obliterated, that want to subjugate women, that want to deface democracy from that side of the world to this side of the world, it's hard to sympathize with the governance of those places. Not to say that's not to say we can't maintain, and I do, and it is devastating, like you said, to see the loss of life, devastating, but to center on the issue at like this, the real foundational problem, when women had the right to wear what they would like to wear in the 50s, and then that just turned over on a whim. We have to ask, when women had the right to wear what they wanted to wear in the 50s in the Arab world.
Like in Iran and
Yeah,
Afghanistan.
well, yeah, I was going to say not in the Arab world. You're talking about the Persian world, like Afghanistan
The,
and
the
Iran.
Persian world, sorry, and then the Arab world. Right, yeah. When they had the right to live in that kind of freedom, and then you see that, you can look at clips on YouTube and you can actually see that just change overnight. It's just hard to sit here and not. But then to your point, I mean, it's also, well, let me finish that point. It's hard to sit here and not to say that Israel should keep going with the way it's going, and to obliterate the face of terror. But then, to your point, and paraphrasing, it becomes very difficult. It does become very difficult when you start to see, IDF, soldiers throwing people off roofs, deceased people off roofs. That just came out I think that was today.
Right.
I saw that. It becomes very difficult there's a cognitive dissonance there that emerges, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, but we're not living there. I'm not living there. I don't know what it's like. And yeah, but yeah, going to the heart of some of this stuff, I think, and I could be, and maybe I'm wrong, but the level of extremism just doesn't seem like something to like that is in it for humanity. That's the point. That's the thing that
Mhm.
I think I'm just struggling with.
Yeah, and I think there's also a lack of like the lack of dialogue, not just in Israel and Palestine, Colombia,
Yeah.
between, my community. And like I went into a class the other day, and it was the how this conflict impacted people was discussed. And there are students that were part of this movement, and the way the administration handled it and the arrests, and it was like very, very harmful to them, and they didn't really understand why it happened, and they didn't understand, like, to them it was just the administration silencing brown people, and they didn't understand that they caused me harm. They didn't even know.
Yeah.
They didn't know. I don't, like, they didn't. It wasn't, they weren't pretending. They were like, it was just protests, and, just people just exercising their right to free. Like,
Yeah.
no one had a discussion with them on how it was not just,
Mhm.
how the word intifada is not just,
Mm.
how, not on an individual level. I mean, maybe they read a letter or something, but like, it wasn't as innocent, or it wasn't experienced as just in this innocent, protest movement. And even like there's like the issue around the arrests of they chose to participate in civil disobedience, which is an important part of many of the civil right of the civil rights movement, of other social justice movements in the past. But no one, in the civil rights movement, when Black people bravely went into restaurants and sat down, they
Right.
knew they were going to get arrested. They
Yeah.
chose to. That is what civil disobedience is. It's saying, I believe in a democracy, I believe in this system, and I'm going to come here and get arrested again and again and again, and I'm willing to until you change the laws. And so to have students participate in civil disobedience and then be traumatized and shocked that they were arrested is, I think it's something that should be raised. I think there's enough professors at Columbia that should have had a conversation with some of these students saying this, hey, like, this is what civil disobedience means. And that's, if you want to do that, and that's part of your movement, it's worked for other movements, like, but know what you're getting into.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah.
And understand that you're going to be arrested, and it's not going to be nice.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Those conversations
you're
weren't had.
no, and you're not just protesting. You are preventing access to a building that does not belong to you from students who have paid to have access to it.
Yeah.
So when you block a street in a protest, my friends are, a lot of them, in Israel has had hundreds of thousands of people protest on Saturday every day. When you go down to the Ayalon highway to block it, you're risking being arrested. And most people know that. And you can complain about how the police arrested you and how much violence was used, and
Right.
different
Excessive force is certainly still
excessive
always
force.
a
Yes.
valid complaint.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And the police totally abuse their power again and again and again. But like, it shouldn't be surprising. It shouldn't be, you know,
Yeah. There's a lack of
like, oh, the
communication.
school, how could they do this? Like, what do you mean, how could
Right.
they do this? Like, this is what your movement wants. If you just took over Hamilton Hall and no one cared and no one paid any attention, I was like, you can just stay there, then your movement hasn't doing anything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Um,
sorry, I feel like I went on a rant there.
No, I
No,
mean,
it's
that's
a
actually
rant.
really good to hear.
It's a rant that I think I can speak for both of us when I say we agree with. Civil disobedience is a part. I mean, built into the strategy is getting arrested. I mean, when during the civil rights movement, a big part of it was the absurdity of being arrested for something so simple, like
Right.
sitting down at a counter at a
Right.
restaurant. It was meant to highlight how just crazy and horrible that was.
Right.
But I think I will play, I guess, maybe devil's advocate or just point something out we're thinking about. I think because of the victimhood narrative and the value of victimhood that exists in a lot of in our university culture and amongst a lot of students and student groups, protesting and then being arrested and then complaining about how, oh, we were mistreated. Oh, I can't believe we were suspended just for speaking our voice, even though they were actually breaking rules. Or I can't believe we were arrested, even though they were technically trespassing or whatever. Assuming that victimhood status is part of it. It's part of
Yeah, I mean, it's a
It's a
strategy.
strategy. Yeah.
However, I feel like on an individual level, like when a student in class is talking about that experience and the harm that it caused them, like I don't for a second think like they're lying or that this is a strategy. Like I do think that's very much has been experienced, and I try to leave space for that. But I think that, and that's why I think dialogue is so important, because there hasn't been, like I said, I don't think a lot of those students understand that these protests weren't just, even when like the evictions happened, like there was that Resistance 101 event where, a member of the Palestinian Liberation Front, I think, was like invited, or someone who's affiliated with them, or,
Right.
that, and then students got evicted, and it was just like, there was no due process. And, like students were really, really, really upset about that. And I didn't feel like, first of all, those students were offered to come and be, like, there was an investigator that invited them to come and be interviewed for it. That an investigation is part of due process. Like if you say to a police officer, I'm not going to come to my, interrogation, there will be consequence, like that. You're saying I'm not interested in this due process, because that's part of the due process.
Yeah.
And they're not even eligible, like their university law is like what dictate, it's not a criminal investigation. They're not eligible for constitutional due process, which I feel like a lot of students felt that they are. Perhaps evicting someone 24 hours, like giving them 24-hour notice, is insane. Like I do not think that was okay by any means. However, I see an administrator seeing a group of students have an unsanctioned event in a private place, inviting a member of an organization that's designated by the US as a terrorist organization, and like with the history of gun violence in American universities, if I'm an administrator and I need to take responsibility for the safety of Jewish students, yeah, like I'm probably going to suspend these students. And I feel like there's the mass majority of students who are really upset by this thing, like no one's having that dialogue with them.
Yeah.
No one's saying, this is ABC, what happened, why these are our considerations. We were genuinely concerned about student safety. If something had happened, like we have people meeting with someone that the government, like I get that you don't think they're a terrorist, but like government thinks it is, and like I have to.
Well, Ariana, again, it goes back to I think the through line of this whole conversation is you have to be able to have those dialogues. And a lot of these students are very either unwilling or unable. And I think those are kind of in a lot of circumstances, those are kind of the same thing with what we're talking about. You have to be willing to do it, because it can be hard. It can be emotional to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And we might not agree at the end. Like we might
not agree at the end.
But you also have an administration that is scared to death to even present these discussions, because they will be labeled accordingly as per the prescriptions and the mandates from the top of the sort of ideology that states, if you should challenge these ideas, then you are an oppressor. I mean, it really does fall to that kind of premise. And so they're afraid. And this new administration, I mean, it's the fifth one since I've been there in the past 2 years. I don't know, but
seriously.
do you have any hopes? I mean, I think at the beginning you'd mentioned.
All right.
I
Well,
think, this year I think I'm gonna be a little bit less cautious. Like
Okay.
I know that the Jewish Caucus is very much behind me at the School of Social Work. We're gonna try and bring speakers from organizations that we think their work is valuable. You know, that might say scary things like peace and you know, two-state solution, or even a federation idea, which I think is super interesting and
I
something that
want to
should
have
be
another
explored.
podcast episode all about that. I think that's
I have a
fascinating.
speaker for you that you're going to bring on that topic. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
We'll
so
talk about
we've
that
been
later.
going for about an hour and 45
Yeah,
minutes. So
yeah.
we do have to wrap up. What I will say is everything you just talked about, that endeavoring to build those discussions and the spaces where I should say where those discussions take place. You know, there is an organization on campus that is dedicated to civic dialogue and open-mindedness and dialogue across difference. It's Heterodox Academy. So feel free to reach out to us. And if you are trying to facilitate difficult conversations, we pride ourselves on being pretty good at helping people do that. So feel free to
Amazing.
reach out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me
Thank
the
you.
time.
My goodness.
yeah.
No, thank you for your time.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
Thank
My
you.
Really
pleasure.
wonderful to talk to you.
We finally made it happen. For those, I'll give you guys real quick behind the scenes. We've been trying to organize this for a while,
Yeah.
and I am guilty of completely putting it in my calendar wrong. So we were supposed to record yesterday, and Ariana was so gracious, but that was after she had to reschedule, and we had to reschedule before that. So it's a long time coming. Thank you so much, Ariana. We will include links to all of the organizations you spoke about. Send us anything else you want to include in the show notes, and we will put it there.
Thank you.
And have a good night and get some sleep because it's getting late.
Yeah.
It's like almost 11.